Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. So, from anti corruption governance to good governance to regulatory governance to corporate governance and corporate social responsibility, our journey now finally takes us to stuff beyond the government, which are called non state actors. Okay. So, we are going to now be discussing non-state actors, and non-state actors largely are on a single spectrum. The spectrum is either towards advocacy or towards core development or social justice or social empowerment. Okay. Now, on this spectrum, advocacy means advocating for rights of the people, advocating for the interests of a certain section of society. Advocacy also means putting forth the expectations and policy from a certain groups. It could be students, businesses, farmers, etc., etc. It could be anything. So, organizations or entities which are performing a largely advocacy function are called pressure groups. Somewhere in the middle are NGOs, which partially perform advocacy and partially perform development and social justice, more towards development and social justice. Then you have international donors or charities, which are more towards development and less towards advocacy, common to paper 4 as a topic as well. And entities which are dominantly working towards development or social justice or social empowerment are self-help groups, particularly for women and the rural segment of the country. Do we understand this? So we have to understand non-state actors. We have to look at them through this spectrum. Are we clear on this? Yes. Now, when we study non-state actors, there are two aspects that we have to understand. One is non-state actors are a function of participatory governance or people generally responsible or people generally being involved towards the larger notions of what should the state be doing. Now, what non-state actors effectively have is that they are assisting in state functions or they are persuading the state without having the authority of the state. Right? Either you are trying to perform state functions or assist the state in performing functions, or you are persuading the state without the authority of the state. So, if an NGO is implementing a welfare scheme as authorized by the government, the NGO in itself is not the government. It is assisting the state in performing the functions of the state, which is welfare. Similarly, if there is a business group called the Confederation of Indian Industry, who is generally trying to speak to the government and trying to make them understand as to what a fluent taxation policy should be, it is to also make the government understand technical matters and what is generally good for ease of doing business. Clear? What is also important to understand is that non-state actors will effectively have the same or a very, very similar legal identity, right? Most of them will have a very similar legal identity. And the legal identity is largely going to be that of a non-profit organization, mostly, right? SHGs can be an exception, but mostly. Do we understand this? That they're mostly going to be non-profit. And therefore, it is as also important for us to understand in the larger context of it what is the general policy around non-profits. Then we understand they're non-state actors, and then we look at each of them and we look at their role as a whole. Are we clear on this? Do we understand this? Perfect. Good. By the way, the UPSC has just revised their cadre allocation policy effective this year. Remember the 4 or 5 zones that we used to have: northeast, west, south? They are now on alphabetical basis. Better. So what was happening with the earlier aspect was, um, like for example, there were a few states, and now every zone will have at least a few good states. I'll show you. Can I take 2 minutes and show you this? It's important for you. It just came this morning. One second. This is the new cadre allocation policy for all India services. The cadre controlling authorities, namely the DOPT, MHA, Environment. DOPT is for all India service, which is IS and IP, IS and Central Services. MHA is for IPS, and Ministry of Environment is for Forest Services. Shall determine the vacancies during the breakup of unreserved SC, ST, OBC for each of the cadres as per the procedure mentioned. The cadre-wise vacancy shall be determined on the basis of the cadre gap. The would indicate a total number of vacancies to be filed the latest by the 31st January of the year following the exam. Which means if your exam, which is now going to happen in 26, by 31st January, all state vacancies should be out. In respect of the services under them, the cadre controlling authority shall determine the vacancies into different categories, which means there's a good chance we can know beforehand. The vacancies of an EWS shall be considered a part of UR. Vacancy so determined shall be communicated to the state and published on ministry's website. Both the actions may preferably be completed before the announcement of the final results, since this would be a time-bound exercise. So, which means there's a good chance that the vacancies are going to be also very clear, so you can know, at least have some ideas to what state cadre you are getting. So these are the new groupings. All state cadres, joint cadres will be arranged in an alphabetical order now. So group 1 will have Agmut, Andhra, Assam, Meghalaya, Bihar and Chhattisgarh. Group 2 is going to have Gujarat, Haryana, Himachal, Jharkhand, Karnataka, Kerala, Madhya Pradesh. Group 3 is going to have Maharashtra, Manipur, Nagaland, Odisha, Punjab, Rajasthan, Sikkim, Tamil Nadu. Group 4 is going to have Telangana, Tripura, Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh and West Bengal. Now the notification is not clear in terms of when it is going to be applicable from. Is it going to be applicable in the current uh, exam cycle or the next one? They are not very clear on this. Okay. Rest is. I'll put this on the Telegram channel. The rest you can read. But good changing times. So yes. So so basically, every group has a good state and what is generally perceived to be a not so good state. Yeah. Mohammed, good morning. See you. See you. Hope all well. Just Telangana and West Bengal in the same UP and West Bengal in the same state. Okay, good. Huh. Don't think so. I don't think it's immediately on the horizon. I know there is a lot of talk about options, but it is definitely not happening for this year. So, if that was the case, they would have informed much, much, much early. Okay. So, let's understand the policy on non-profits, and then we'll look at advocacy groups and stuff related to it. So the larger, the larger policy on non-profits is something similar. So first, we have to understand what the types of non-profits are, and then we'll understand the policies around it. Okay, types. First things first. When we look at the types of non-profits, our first way to differentiate between is in terms of their legal identity, which simply means how are they registered, under what laws are they registered. No, no, I'm fine, thank you, thank you. Now, the first and the most common form is a public charitable trust. Okay, they are generally used for public charity or religious purposes. They are governed by state laws wherever there are state laws. There are some general legal principles also. Please understand that there is something called the Indian Trust Act. The Indian Trusts Act of 1882 does not apply to public religious or charitable endowments. Do we understand this? Yes or no? As clearly as possible. Good. They are mainly governed by state laws. This has nothing to do with the Indian Trust Act of 1882. Okay. Now, generally, the Indian Trust Act of 1882, then we would have a question by what does it do? See, broadly, the Indian Trust Act of 1882, which is an old legislation, the Indian Trust Act of 1882 is a mechanism largely for private trusts. Okay, where a trust by the Indian Trust Act of 1882 is nothing but where there is an owner who transfers property to any other person, a third party. It basically creates a asset management and a taxation structure. Are we clear on this? Yes or no? ठीक. So this has nothing to do with public charitable trusts. Good. Then you have what are called societies. Societies are generally membership based associations. You have to be a member of a society. This is generally membership driven. This is registered under the Societies Registration Act, which is 1860, and there is some flexibility of state amendments. So if you have to be registered as a national society or a state society, then if the concerned state government has some state specific laws on it, then those will apply if you're registering only to be a society of that state. Clear? Makes sense? No problem at all. Yes or no? Good. You will generally see societies registered for education, for health, for culture, for research, for sort of welfare associations. Generally, societies are like that. Then you have what are called Section 8 companies. Used to be previously Section 125 of the earlier Companies Act, but Section 8 companies. These are called non-profit companies, NPCs, under Section 8 of the Companies Act 2013. Now, what are non-profit companies? It simply means that a company where you will make profit, but profit will not be distributed as dividend. It would simply be spent back on the core objectives of the organization, right? So, no dividend distributions. Okay, are we fine? And then there are some special forms as well. For example, you would have heard of religious endowments, right? You would have heard of something called a religious endowment. Have you heard of a waqf? Is in the news. So, religious endowments, which is basically a waqf. Yeah, right. Good. Sometimes you will see societies which are registered under state laws. Sometimes you will also see some statute created bodies. Like, for example, technically universities are also something like that, depending on sector to sector. Correct? Simple as that. Uh, FICCI is a society. I think so. FICCI is a society. All right. It is, in fact, if I'm not wrong, it is one of the earliest and one of the oldest federations. Okay, good. Now, another way to look at non-profits is on account of what they do. So, for example, they might be for charitable purposes, relief of the poor, poverty, education, health, environment. They could also be for religious purposes, temples, gurudwaras, waqf, stuff like that. Sometimes they can also be on principles of mutual benefit, like they're essentially societies serving members, and they would generally not get a lot of tax benefits because if they're structured in a certain way. So, for example, you would have heard of, let us say, the IS Association, right? The IS Association is technically a society, but is it a charitable society? No, it is a collective organization for the larger view of the welfare of civil servants. Clear? Good. Then another way to look at non-profits is in terms of how they operate. Now, there are multiple ways of their operations being structured. Some of them are grant making. Now, grant making could mean, I'll write it separately, easier. So, grant making could mean that you are effectively a funding agency. For example, if you heard of something called US aid, which was in the news a lot, US aid was largely a grant making agency. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was effectively a grant making agency that they would fund other people to do job on the ground, to undertake certain action on the ground. Then there are some operations based also, the ones which actually work on ground, like operational NGOs. They're the ones who run projects. Like for example, Pratham you would have heard of. You would have heard of Child Relief and You, right? Sadbhavna. They run actual, yes, Red Cross. They run actual, work on ground. Then you would also have advocacy or rights based, that their job is to fight for rights. Like for example, you would have heard of the Internet Freedom Foundation, which continuously keeps going to court for digital rights in a digital world. You would have heard of Association of Democratic Reforms, one of India's front runner in terms of electoral rights and voting rights and best practices. Right? They're effectively an advocacy or a rights based NGO. Then also you can have some community based NGOs also. For example, you may have heard of something called Jito, which is a Jain, outfit whose job is to effectively work for the welfare of students of the Jain community. You'll see them building hostels, and you'll see them building coaching centers or facilitating education and so on and so forth. And you can also have some large, professional NGOs like Red Cross who work on a larger scale. So, in terms of who they are, in terms of what they are, you'll see that their legal identity, purpose, and how they operate are largely the ways you could look at it from. Are we okay with this? Do we understand this? Yes or no? Good. Now, now we look at the laws or the legality of NGOs in terms of how they are and what they are and what are they supposed to do and how they're supposed to run. Now, first things first, there are some core formation laws under which you can register yourself or set your identity. So, Societies Registration Act 1860, Section 8, Companies Act 2013. You will have public trust regulation, which is state wise. So, for example, the Bombay Public Trust Act, state public trust acts. So, for example, you have the Bombay Trust Act of 1915, which actually provides for a charity commissioner who would be responsible for trusts of charitable purposes in Bombay and back in the day Gujarat. And then you have the Indian Trust Act of 1882, which largely deals with private trusts, nothing to do with public, religious, or charitable organizations. And religious endowments are regulated separately through their specific laws, state specific laws. And for Waqf, we have a national law. Yes or no? Do we understand this? Are we clear on this? We've discussed the general legal framework of what are Waqf and how is it done. Simple as that. So, legally speaking, charitable and religious institutions are under the concurrent list, which means both the center and the states can make laws on it. Now, in India, the management and the creation of Waqf is governed by a central law. But for other religions, you can have state specific laws. Are we clear on this? Do we understand this? Yes or no? So while we have a Waqf Act, there is the Karnataka Hindu Religious Endowments Act of 1997. There is an Andhra Pradesh Charitable and Hindu Religious Endowments Act of 1987. There is the for the Sikh also there is a national act called the Sikh Gurudwaras Act of 1925. Are we clear on this? So you will have center and state religious endowment acts. Okay, good. Simple as this. Now, once we understand this, our job is to then understand, is there some form of tax exemption or some tax benefit that you get? So yes, there are going to be some intersections, or you can call it intersections or whatever, some taxation related provisions as well. Now, before we get into this, take a minute and think, why is there tax exemption? What is the tax exemption is not very relevant for you in the exam, but why is there tax exemption for NGOs actually becomes a little important. The answer to that is a simple one. देखो, अगर एनजीओ सरकार का काम कर रही है, विच इज वेलफेयर का काम कर रही है, सरकार भी टैक्स लेके वेलफेयर का ही काम करती है. जब हम सरकार को टैक्स देते हैं, तो सरकार को हम कोई एक स्पेसिफिक पर्पस से टैक्स नहीं देते कि हमारे इनकम टैक्स का पैसा सिर्फ गार्डन बनाने में लगाएंगे, या हमारे इनकम टैक्स का पैसा से सिर्फ ब्रिज बनेगा. ऐसा तो नहीं करते ना. दैट्स नॉट समथिंग वी डू. ठीक है, फेयर. NGOs is effectively structured on donations. Donations are choice based. So tax exemption would mean कि लोग अपने मन से टैक्स के अलावा कुछ पैसा डोनेट कर रहे हैं, और वो पैसा डोनेट कर रहे हैं एक स्पेसिफिक एनजीओ को एक स्पेसिफिक कॉज के लिए. तो जब आप देश के डेवलपमेंट के लिए वैसे ही पैसा खर्च कर रहे हो, तो एज ए सिटीजन आप उस पर कम टैक्स देना, और आप देश के भले के लिए ही उस पैसे से काम कर रहे हो, नहीं तो वो काम हमें करना पड़ता. तो उस काम पे हमें मत टैक्स दो. कलेक्टर का ऑफिस टैक्स देता है क्या? टैक्स तो सिर्फ प्रॉफिट मेकिंग पीएसयूज देती है, मतलब जो प्रॉफिट वाली पीएसयूज होती है. यस और नो? मिनिस्ट्री कौन सा टैक्स देता है? स्टेट डिपार्टमेंट्स कौन सा टैक्स देते? कोई टैक्स नहीं देते, a tax free organization. So if you're also performing a simple function, if you're also performing a taxation function, then you should also work accordingly. तो जो टैक्सेशन का आइडिया है, जो द प्रिंसिपल ऑफ टैक्सेशन is actually dual in nature. One is the fact that it is a tax exemption for contributors, and second is for agencies. So contributors or agencies or entities. Are we okay with this? Do we understand this? Good. So the primary law, the central law that gives you a tax exemption, what is the tax exemption that there is? The primary law is the Income Tax Act. Okay. It is central for you to have a charitable status. Now, it is the Income Tax Act which will govern both contributors also and agencies also, primarily from a taxation purpose. So under the Income Tax Act, you have to have a specific registration under certain sections for you to be exempted from paying tax. Okay. So you have to be registered first as an entity, and then you have to be registered under a specific section of the Income Tax Act. I think the current one is section 12AA and 12AB, and red with section 11, not important for you. So organizations will have exemption from tax. What you have commonly heard of is donor deductions, section 80G. What are donor deductions? So 80G governs donor deductions for approved institutions. Please understand, they are not mutually inclusive. You don't have to pay tax, and people who fund you also don't have to pay tax on what they funded, is not necessarily correlated. Okay? You don't have to pay tax is one part of the story. People who contribute to you also don't have to pay tax is the second part of the story. Do we understand this? Yes? Good. So the Income Tax Act of 1961, contributors generally section 11 and 12AA, 12AB. Sorry, agencies is section 11, 12AA, 12AB. Given the kind of policy-based questions I've started to ask in the pre, it also gives a lot of substance to our answers in paper 2 and paper 4. That is for this batch, like for you guys, have really thought that let's do a good policy framework also, because something that I've generally seen is generally students are not aware of what the policy framework is. The whole understanding of the non-profit sector is it's very bizarre. It's very superficial, right? And section 80G is where there is a contributor exemption. Now there is another aspect where UPSC has its most favorite questions asked from, and also very heavily in the news. This is called foreign funding. Okay. Now, do all of them receive foreign funding? No. Can all of them receive a foreign funding? The answer is also no. Only a set type. Now, for that, you have a governing law called the Foreign Contribution Regulatory Act. The Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, which replaced what was, which is now the most recent law. enacted in 2010 with some significant amendments in 2020, which has no. Fera Fema is completely different, Satvik. Fera Fema is any inflow of foreign capital in India. It has nothing to do with non-profit, right? So Fera Fema is an ED problem. FCRA is a Home Ministry problem. The designated agency for monitoring foreign funding, very interestingly, is the MHA. And Satvik, very interestingly, the designated agency for FERA and FEMA is the Finance Ministry eventually. So, when it comes to funding of NGOs, though it's a core finance function, is with the Home Ministry. But when it comes to general inflow of capital, it is the Finance Ministry. Do we understand this? So, we have been very, very cautious of foreign funding in India, where the MHA is directly responsible, which is why you would often hear of MHAs cancelling foreign licenses or eventually cancelling NGO licenses because of some compliance related issues. Good. Now they are generally the ones which the FCRA laws and their amendments are the ones which generally regulate the incoming of foreign contribution and how foreign contributions are to be used. Now, it simply means that there is going to be a dedicated FCRA account at a specific SBI branch in New Delhi. Now, if you are an NGO anywhere in the country, does not matter. And if you want foreign funds, then you have to have an account at SBI in New Delhi, Parliament Street branch. I think Parliament Street branch. Then you also need to ensure that the Aadhars of all the core management of the NGO submitted. Money that you received as NGO cannot be transferred to another NGO. So, grant making NGOs and foreign funding internally in India is going to be a problem. Clear? And all of those things have generally happened because you want to keep a slightly stronger supervision in the way NGOs are generally functioning. Are we clear on this? Yes or no? Good. Then, another cross set of laws and regulations, which therefore become very important for us, is CSR, right? Which is Section 135 of the Companies Act 2013 and the CSR rules that have been made. Are we clear on this? Yes, we've done CSR in detail, right? Good. There is technically no limit on CSR spending, but if you are in the criteria, then there's a minimum eligibility that you have to fulfill. Okay, good. Now, apart from this, these non-state actors may also receive state funding. Yes or no? The government may also fund them. The question is there a mechanism? Is there a set of laws that govern government funding? The answer is no, there are some rules. So you've got General Financial Rules of 2017, which basically give you norms for giving grants to non-governmental organizations in terms of how the grants have to be utilized, what are the conditions, how do you report them. Now, in addition to this, some ministries have also had additional layer of grants, right? Now, for example, let us say you may want to hire an NGO to train Anganwadis. You may want to hire an NGO to educate women about the benefits of the Matru Vandana Yojana. Now, or you may want to have trained NGOs to maybe educate more people about skilling. So there has to be some set of mechanisms in place. Clear? Now, non-profit organizations technically can also be listed on the stock exchange. The only thing is that SEBI would require some greater, you know, disclosure norms and stuff like that. Okay. Now, on the policy front, we had something called the National Policy on the Voluntary Sector in 2017, which was largely created to create a congenial environment and accountability for voluntary organizations and basically partnerships in development. And very recently, we have created what is called NGO Darpan. This is something you may be slightly aware of. Clear? So NGO Darpan is basically an Aadhaar card for NGOs, put it simply. It's a government repository. It is a unique common ID used for, accessing government schemes, grants, etc. Are we clear on this? Do we understand this? Good. Now, over and above this, you would also have horizontal compliances or cross-sectional laws, which means that labor laws would also apply to NGOs. It also means that food, if you're working in the food space sectorally, food laws will also apply to you. So, for example, if you're an NGO whose job is to distribute food packets to the hungry, that doesn't mean you can distribute whatever you feel like. You would also have to comply with food standards. Similarly, if you are an NGO imparting education to underprivileged areas, great, good, but you will have some education norms that will be applicable to you. If you're an NGO who's ensuring that the doctors are able to, you are setting up, medical aid camps and rural camps. Rural dental camps are very famous, right? You would also have to comply with clinical establishment rules as well. Do we understand this? Yes or no? Clear? Terrorist funding through NGOs is also foreign funding. Good, Simran, that is completely illegal. We're talking about the good non-state actors. Terrorists and Naxals are not the good non-state actors. So non-state actors are fundamentally good and bad. In paper 2, we do the good ones. Paper 4, we do generally the good ones. Paper 3 is where you do the bad ones. So terrorists, Naxals, money launderers, those kind of people. Right? Good. That's also why, and I mean, obviously, that's also why under MHA. Yeah, very good. So, do we understand the larger framework? Is this clear? 100%. So, when I say that ABC is an NGO, that NGO has to be registered as a society, as a trust, as a non-profit company. Something, the legal identity is going to be this. The word NGO has no legal identity. There is no law that is NGO Registration Act, which is also a problem with how laws are complicated. Are we clear on this? Good. So are we set now? The larger policy is clear? Good. So now we can discuss largely what the specific advocacy groups are doing, and so on and so forth. Good. Can we do international donors today itself? Sorry, can we do pressure groups today itself? Because everything else is development oriented. Is that okay? Good, बढ़िया. So take a quick 5 minute review this. Get your head around it, and then start in 5 minutes, and we'll do pressure groups. Okay, now let us study specifically pressure groups. Okay, now the framework is clear. We'll pick up participatory governance and move to pressure groups. So, the fundamental question that we're generally trying to understand is why are people, and by people you mean ordinary citizens, looking for a higher role in governance? It's a very simple setup. There are some basic factors. The first set of factors are political factors. Now, under political factors, the first point is effectively about democratization. Now, when we say democratization, it simply means we have sort of transformed from a colonial regime to a democratic system where citizens are effectively creating governments through elections, through representatives, and with democracy automatically comes accountability. Second is the aspect of decentralization, where you are delegating powers to local governments, which increases public participation in decision making at grassroots level. So now, where local governments are more powerful, or at least are constitutionally supposed to be powerful for localized matters, people would also start taking a keen interest in affairs. Third, your constitutional and legal provisions have been a support system like RTI, PIL, reservation for marginalized groups. All of these have led to direct public engagement, and you have certain participatory governance models where you know you have public consultation, environment impact assessment, uh, citizen assemblies. In India, we don't do it as much, but referendums and so on and so forth. These are effectively participatory governance models. Yes or no? Make sense? Correct? Good. Then there are some social factors. Now, when we look at these social factors, there is generally an increased degree of awareness and educational levels. So, greater access to education allows citizens with knowledge about their rights, about their entitlements, and also are more aware of the governance process. अब जब पता है कि मेरी ये राइट है और गवर्नमेंट मेरे को ये नहीं करके दी तो मैं पूछूंगा ना. दूसरा, there is also an engagement of a higher degree with civic society. So advocacy by NGOs, community groups, activist networks, all of these are effectively amplifying the voice of citizens. Three, today diversity and inclusion is the mainstay of policy. So you have to recognize diverse communities, integrate them. You have to include marginalized communities into governance structures. There has to be a broader representation. And media influence has also drastically increased. Then there are certain economic factors wherein, say, one of the first things you refer to is economic empowerment, where there's a growth in income levels. There is a growth in economic stability, this will enable individuals to engage very actively in governance, and there are going to be lesser financial constraints. With mandated corporate social responsibility, the private sector also gets involved in social factors, and globalization has played a very significant role in establishing certain sets of global norms, certain practices, which generally encourage people to demand higher standards of governance and accountability, one would say. Yes or no? Then there are also technological factors. For example, there is digital revolution. Today, with governance, mobile apps, your CP grams and everything, social media has amplified citizen government interaction. And this technological breakthrough is effectively supposed to increase transparency, whether it is data analytics or blockchain or whatever it is, and fundamentally leads to a new form of activism, which is called online activism, right? And then there are some cultural factors also. I've used a simple pastel approach to answer this. If you look at the cultural factors, there is a shift in the philosophy behind governance from just being government as a ruler to a government as a facilitator, to facilitate the needs and the aspirations of the people. There is a larger, at least, aspiration towards value based leadership or governance, which is to include, you know, inclusivity, participatory, governance, and so on and so forth. Very interestingly, globally as well, there have been certain factors. Say your international norms like sustainable development goals. Today, with diaspora being connected, there is an indirect enhancement of people participation, right? And institutionally, your agencies like independent election commissions, judiciary, ombudsman offices, Lokpal, etc., they are supposed to strengthen the courage of the people. So you have institutions like the Judiciary Election Commission, Ombudsman, and at the same time, you also have mechanisms of accountability like social audits, citizen report cards. So these factors effectively enhance the role of people in a larger governance framework. Isn't that the case? Yes or no? Yes. Good. Now, this has to therefore be applied as a standard template to every pressure group. What are the political challenges with pressure groups, social challenges with pressure groups, economic challenges, technological challenges, cultural challenges, global challenges, institutional challenges? Are we clear on this? Yes, good. In fact, Satvik, speaking of Khap Panchayats, are the first thing that we think of when we say Khap Panchayats is that they're shady people, right? In terms of intercaste marriages and everything. But you'd be surprised to know that the government of Haryana collaborates massively with Khap Panchayats because a majority of Khap Panchayats are very strong outfits which can have great impact socially, right? And the government has been partnering with Khap Panchayats for issues like female infanticide, for issues like child marriage. So there are a bunch of Khaps which are a little political, which are a little caste based in a very entrenched form. But there are also Khaps which look at general social well being. Right? You're from Haryana, you would know. Correct? Good. Now, if I apply this to pressure groups for reference purposes, keep a check on MCN60. As your reference pair template. But generally understanding pressure groups are nothing but organized associations with a shared interest. This shared interest may not necessarily be welfare, with a specific intention to influence policy. Do we understand this? An organized group having a common interest to influence policy, and you would do all of this without directly seeking political power. Can a pressure group convert into a political entity later? Sure. But the larger principle is this. So they will not contest elections. They will seek influence in executive, legislature, public opinion. They will generally exist in almost any democracy where you know, association rights, association freedoms are guaranteed, like how we have under Article 19. And while being organized, they can be temporary, they can be formal, they can be permanent, they can be informal. So they can be any of the formats. Organization here, please understand this means all forms. It can be formal and informal also. It can be temporary also and permanent also. Are we clear on this? Yes. And fundamentally, their job is formation of interests, aggregating common demands, to also play a sort of a mediatory role between citizens and government to effectively influence policy and largely look at democratization because the government is sitting in an isolated chamber making policies without asking. So whether it is, the All India Trade Union Congress of 1920 or, the All India Kisan Sabha of 1936, or even, for example, in the UK, the oldest abolition society of the year 1787, these are all aspects of nothing but pressure groups. Contemporarily, you will think of Narmada Bachao Andolan, Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangh, India Against Corruption, FICCI, in very diverse ranges. So Narmada Bachao is environment. Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangh actually is the instrumental player behind right to information. India Against Corruption is largely for corruption. Yes, FICI or CII largely for pro business opportunities. So you will see these pressure groups which would be business oriented, they could be labor or trade union oriented, they could be farmer groups, exam is specifically asked, they could be professional groups, there could be religious or caste based. Yes, there could be some form of student based groups, you can have some social groups, you can also have institutional groups as well. So institutional and non associational, are we clear on this? Do we understand this? I've given you their role and their examples in one large table. So FICI, ASOCHAM, CII, these are all business groups. The kind of work they do, yes or no? And very specific successes and limitations given there in itself for each type. Because either UPSC asks pressure groups as a whole, or they've asked specific type of pressure groups. They've asked farmer in the context of farmer protests. Are we clear on this? Yes. And each of them will have certain unique factors. So if it's a business group, you look at business policy, they would have a very strong influence on the budget. The problem is they can be sometimes fronts for lobbying, and they're largely represented by large business houses. When I look at labor groups or trade union groups, they are generally politicized, they're generally fragmented. If they are politicized and they are fragmented, that means there is a general problem to worry. Correct? Yes or no? They do not have that kind of a broad-based influence. Farmer groups are regional. They're generally going to be richer farmers who will capture the forefront. Threats of politicization. So if you think about it, each of these will have the same set of problems. The agenda is always going to be donor driven. Whoever pulls in most resources gets to decide what is the kind of approach the organization should have. I'll only give you X amount of money if you take up this cause. Second, there is a local absence. Most of these do not have local cadres, right? Third, a lot of the times you would see their agendas to be short term. Fourth, you will see several problems several times. They would be fragmented across region, sub-region, and sometimes there's also going to be a larger case of duplication. The same set of organizations doing the same set of things. And this donor can also withdraw, so there's donor fatigue. If the donor pulls out money, then the organization is left with nothing. Are we clear on this? Yes. So you need to strengthen local participation. You need to ensure that these are also working in the larger national priorities set by the state. And you have to ensure that there is a proper, it's called the triangular cooperation, where state, citizens, and pressure groups, they all work in tandem. And they have to be fundamentally more transparent. And some form of institutionalized funding should be there. And these pressure groups should also be technically trained to bring in that kind of expertise, and therefore encourage accountability to beneficiaries at large. Are we clear on this? If I'm putting money in, I should know what is the stand that is generally taken. Clear? Yes. Very similar. Your ability should be to look at the larger picture. Okay. See you in the evening or tomorrow morning, and we'll finish up non-state actors and then do social sectors tomorrow evening. In the meantime, you'll see the notes also on the Telegram channel. I'm almost done. Last minute, some ministry reviews had been uploaded on PIB 3 days ago. Just updating a few, schemes and everything. Okay. Okay. Take care, Satwik. We'll see. Bye bye. See you.